The relationship between the U.S. military and the American university system has always been, let's just call it, complicated.
Complicated is a good word. It's a real pendulum.
Yeah, it swings between, close cooperation, the GI Bill or Cold War research, and then intense friction.
Yeah.
Like during Vietnam.
Right.
But if you look at the news dropping out of the Pentagon this week, specifically about Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Harvard, well, it looks like the pendulum hasn't just swung.
It snapped off the hinge.
It really has.
I mean, this is a rupture. We are not talking about a temporary freeze or some kind of diplomatic spat. This is a structural uncoupling. The Pentagon is basically saying that the nation's oldest university is no longer a suitable place to train American officers.
And that is the massive development we are unpacking today. It's February 2026, and the headline is that the Pentagon is officially cutting all of its academic ties with Harvard.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into the specifics, what programs are cut, who gets to stay. But the real mission here is to understand the why. Because this isn't just about budget cuts. This is an ideological battle over strategic education versus what the administration is now calling ideological training.
And that distinction is everything. This is really about defining what a military officer is supposed to be in the mid-21st century. Secretary Hegseth is drawing a very, very hard line here.
Okay.
He's making the case that the academic environment at these elite schools doesn't just fail to add value, it actively degrades what he calls the warrior ethos.
Warrior ethos. So let's get into the actual announcement first. The report says the Pentagon will end all graduate-level professional military education, fellowships, certificate programs
Right, all of it.
at Harvard, starting with the 2026-2027 school year. So for you listening, if you aren't, deep in the weeds of military career paths, how big of a deal is this, really?
Oh, it's significant. I mean, for decades, the military has sent its high-potential officers.
The ones on the fast track.
The ones on the fast track, exactly. The majors and lieutenant colonels who are tapped to become generals and admirals, they send them to top-tier civilian universities.
And Harvard's Kennedy School has always been a top prize.
A premier destination. The whole idea was you take a tactical leader, someone who's great at, driving tanks or flying jets, and you drop them into a completely civilian environment to learn policy, diplomacy, economics.
To broaden their horizons before they get, huge responsibility.
Exactly. It was called broadening, but this new directive, it just flips that entire logic on its head.
How so?
The Pentagon is now saying that this broadening is actually softening. So by cutting these programs, they are dismantling a specific rung on the career ladder that has existed for generations.
And the language Hegseth used to justify it.
Yeah.
It wasn't exactly subtle.
No, not at all.
He said the department sent officers to Harvard hoping the university would appreciate the warrior class, but, and this is a quote, they came back with heads full of globalist and radical ideologies.
And globalist is the key word there.
Right.
In this context, he's not just using it as like a generic buzzword, he's setting it up in direct opposition to a nationalist, America First mindset for military operations. The administration's view is that when you send an officer to the Kennedy School, they're taught that international norms, coalitions, soft power, that these things are paramount.
And Hegseth wants them focused on what?
On lethality and American dominance, not the nuances of international liberalism.
He literally said, "We train warriors, not wokesters. Harvard, good riddance."
I mean, you can't be much clearer than that.
That's the quote on the Chiron. So let's dig into that warrior versus wokester binary. It feels like a branding exercise, but is there a tangible policy grievance under it?
Oh, there is. The grievance is all about the return on investment.
Okay.
The military pays millions in tuition and salaries for these officers to go to Cambridge. Hegseth is claiming that instead of coming back as sharper strategists, they're coming back hesitant or overly concerned with social justice frameworks, or what he called hate America activism.
So he sees the university as a kind of contagion.
A contagion that infects the officer corps with doubts about the very mission they're supposed to execute.
So if you're the defense secretary, you're looking at this and thinking, why am I paying a premium to have my best people taught that their employer is the bad guy?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's a very powerful argument to make to the taxpayer. Why subsidize an institution that, in their view, holds the military in contempt?
What's the counter argument then?
Well, the counter-argument, which is getting a bit drowned out right now, is that you want officers who understand those critiques. You want generals who understand how their adversaries and their allies think, even if they don't agree.
Right.
By pulling out, you might preserve this warrior ethos, but you might also create an officer corps that is intellectually walled off from the society it's there to protect.
That isolation piece is huge. I want to come back to that, but first we have to talk about the messenger.
Yeah.
Because Pete Hegseth isn't some random official who just read about Harvard in a briefing. He was a Harvard grad.
Master's in Public Policy, class of 2013, which gives him this unique kind of credibility in this fight. He's an insider.
He walked the halls.
He walked the halls, he sat in those seminars. So when he critiques the curriculum, he's speaking from what he sees as personal experience, which makes it much harder for Harvard to just dismiss him as someone who doesn't get it.
And the source mentions this moment from 2022, back when he was in the media. He famously wrote, "Return to sender," on his diploma, live on air.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was a piece of political theater, sure, but now he's in the seat of power, and he's turning that sentiment into official government policy.
It proves that moment wasn't just a stunt for ratings, it was a statement of intent. He genuinely believes that institution has drifted so far from the values he thinks are necessary for national defense.
And for a lot of people, the Ivy League has become a symbol of
everything they think is wrong with the American elite. Credentialism, insularity, performative progressivism. Hegseth is tapping right into that resentment and, well, he's operationalizing it.
It's a divorce, every sense of the word. But it wasn't always like this.
Not at all.
I was looking at the notes, and there's this stat that even Hegseth himself had to acknowledge. Harvard has produced more Medal of Honor recipients than any other civilian institution in the country.
It's true. That implies a deep, historic bond. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, these places were the training grounds for the American establishment, including the military leadership.
During World War II, the connection was seamless.
Absolutely. The Marshall Plan was basically drafted by Harvard minds. But the administration is arguing that the Harvard of 1945 is dead. They argue that the university broke that social contract, not the military.
So they're saying, we didn't leave you, you left us.
That's the narrative, exactly. Even though the infrastructure's still there, as of late 2025, you had over 100 cadets and midshipmen on campus, nearly 80 veterans.
Right.
The trust required for a strategic partnership is gone. They don't see Harvard as neutral ground for education anymore. They see it as hostile territory.
So if they're not going to Harvard, where do they go? The Pentagon isn't just going to stop training senior officers.
Of course not.
The report mentions a review of cost-effective strategic education. What does that actually mean?
That's the pivot. The Pentagon is signaling a big shift toward two alternatives. Public universities and internal military education. They're asking, why pay $60,000, $70,000 a year to Harvard when we could send an officer to the University of Texas or Purdue or just expand our own war colleges?
It's the bang for the buck argument.
It is. And technically, the war colleges, like the Naval War College or the Army War College, they are designed specifically to teach strategy. The argument is like they can control the curriculum there.
Make sure the focus stays on logistics, history, and warfare.
Without the ideological drift they see in the Ivy League.
But isn't there a big downside to that? If everyone just goes to the war college, aren't they just talking to themselves?
That is the risk. The value of the Kennedy School wasn't just the coursework, it was the network.
Yeah.
You had future generals sitting next to future nonprofit leaders, tech CEOs, foreign diplomats. That rubbing of shoulders, as they call it, builds a kind of soft power network that pays dividends for decades.
And if you silo the military into its own educational bubble,
or only send them to schools that already align with military culture, you lose all that cross-pollination. You might get a purer warrior, perhaps, but maybe a less connected one.
it sounds like we're just building two different worlds that don't interact anymore.
They're drifting apart.
And speaking of that, this isn't just happening at the graduate level. There was a note in the source material that really jumped out at me. It seemed like a total non sequitur at first, but now I think it's connected.
Let me guess. Scouting America.
Exactly. The Pentagon is also putting pressure on Scouting America, what used to be the Boy Scouts.
It is absolutely connected. You have to look at this like a supply chain problem. Harvard is the end of the pipeline, the senior leaders.
And the Scouts are the beginning.
The Scouts are the start of the pipeline, the recruitment pool. The military relies heavily on organizations like that to foster an interest in service, instill some basic discipline in young people.
And the Pentagon is threatening to cut ties there, too.
They've issued a warning. They told Scouting America they risk losing their military partnership unless they institute core value reforms.
And do we know what those reforms are?
The list isn't public yet, but if you're reading between the lines of the last year's policies, it's almost certainly about the Scouts' moves toward inclusivity and more progressive social stances.
So the administration is effectively trying to control the entire life cycle of a soldier.
That's a good way to put it.
From the moment a 12-year-old joins the Scouts to when a 40-year-old colonel gets a master's degree, the Pentagon wants to ensure they are not being exposed to what it considers woke ideology.
That is the comprehensive strategy. It is about cultural control. If you can't change the culture of the civilian institutions, you just disengage from them, and you demand conformity from the partners you decide to keep.
It's a very aggressive use of the Pentagon's power.
It's monopsony power. They are the biggest buyer of defense talent in the world, and they're starting to dictate terms to their suppliers.
And when you say dictate terms, we're really talking about money, because that's the other huge lever here.
Right.
Harvard has an endowment the size of a small country, but federal funding is still a massive part of their research budget.
It is. We're not just talking tuition for a few dozen officers. We're talking billions in research grants. Medical, technological, scientific.
And the Trump administration has been using this as a cudgel. They froze over $2 billion in grants, which led to that lawsuit where Harvard actually won.
They won a preliminary victory, yes, back in September 2025.
The judge ruled the freeze was unconstitutional.
Right. A judge ruled that the administration couldn't just arbitrarily stop research funding based on unrelated political grievances. But, and here's the nuance, the Pentagon has legally distinct authority over training and personnel. The judge can say, you have to fund the Cancer Research Lab, but the judge cannot tell the Secretary of Defense, you must send Major Jones to the Kennedy School.
So this academic ban is a way to get around the court ruling.
In a way, yeah. It's a lever they can pull without a judge's permission. It sends the same signal, we're cutting you off. But it does it through personnel policy, not grant administration. It keeps the pressure on.
It just creates this incredibly hostile environment.
Yeah.
If you're the president of Harvard or Yale or Columbia, you have to be looking at this and realizing the era of automatic partnership with the federal government is just over.
It forces a choice. Do these universities maintain their academic independence and their current social values, knowing it'll cost them access to the military and potentially other agencies? Or do they bend the knee to get the contracts back?
And Hegseth is betting that in the end, money talks.
He is. But looking at Harvard's response, or, lack thereof, it doesn't seem like they're bending yet.
Yeah.
And honestly, Harvard might be wealthy enough to say, fine, we don't need you. But for smaller schools or for an organization like the Scouts, that pressure is existential.
Okay, let's pull back and look at the so what here. We have a military that is increasingly defining itself in opposition to the civilian cultural elite.
Yeah.
A Secretary of Defense who calls his own alma mater a red-hot center of hate. Where does this go in 5 or 10 years?
It leads to a widening of the civil-military gap. This is something political scientists have worried about for a long time. In a healthy democracy, the military is of the people. It reflects the society it defends.
But if it becomes a caste?
Yes. If the military becomes a caste, culturally distinct, educated in its own silo, politically aligned against universities and the media, it becomes much harder for civilian leadership to effectively oversee it.
It becomes a state within a state.
Potentially. Or at least, it becomes a tribe that views the other tribe with deep suspicion. If the warriors see the intellectuals as enemies and the intellectuals see the warriors as uneducated brutes, you lose the ability to have rational national security debates.
And just from a practical standpoint, what about the quality of the officers? Hegseth says he wants warriors, but isn't the modern battlefield, pretty globalist?
That's the great irony, isn't it? The modern battlefield is information warfare, it's cyber, it's coalition building in the Indo-Pacific, it's understanding supply chains in Africa. These are deeply complex intellectual challenges.
So the warrior of 2026 needs to be a diplomat and an economist, too.
They do. So by cutting off that broad education, you might actually be getting a less effective warrior.
That's the danger.
You might get someone who is very eager to fight, but less capable of understanding the environment they're fighting in. Hegseth would argue the current education is making them too hesitant to fight. That's the core tension.
Is the hesitation wisdom, or is it weakness?
And the Pentagon has decided it's weakness, and they are surgically cutting it out.
This is a story that's going to keep evolving. The ban kicks in for the 2026-2027 school year, so we'll see if other universities get added to the list.
Or if Harvard makes any concessions.
Right. But for now,
Mhm.
the path from Cambridge to the Pentagon is officially closed.
And for you listening, whether you're in the private sector or public service, you should pay attention to this pattern, this decoupling of institutions based on ideology. Red supply chains versus blue supply chains. It's reshaping how America functions. It started with cable news, then social media, and now it's hitting the bedrock institutions of defense and education.
I want to leave you all with a final thought today.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about the warrior versus the wokester. It's a catchy slogan. But just think about the complexity of the world we're in. If the U.S. military deliberately stops engaging with top civilian minds to avoid ideology, where will future generals learn to understand the complex, messy, global societies they're sworn to protect? If you only talk to people who already agree with you, do you lose the ability to anticipate what your enemy is thinking?
Or even what your allies are thinking. That's the question. Are we building a sharper sword, or are we just putting on a blinder?
Something to think about. That's it for this deep dive into the Pentagon-Harvard breakup. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.